Welcome back to the Wisdom Advantage podcast. I'm Anna Morgan, and this is our Fun Facts Companion episode, the lighter little sidecar to this week's main lesson. If the main episode was the serious sit-down, this one is more like kitchen table conversation with a cup of coffee and a raised eyebrow.
Raised eyebrow is right. I'm Tom Morgan, and I don't need novelty for novelty's sake. If we're doing facts, I want facts that actually mean something.
That is why you're here, Dad. You are, truly, a very hard audience.
I've earned that.
You really have. So today we've got 3 that are worth your time. First, imposter syndrome. That awful voice in your head that says, "Who do you think you are?" was only named in 1978. Which is kind of wild because before that, a whole lot of people were feeling it without having language for it.
That alone is interesting. Feels ancient. Turns out it isn't.
Exactly. Second, one of the biggest myths floating around right now is that AI is basically a young person's playground. But the research we looked at says adults over 55 are among the fastest growing groups of consistent ChatGPT users.
Consistent users. That's the important part. Not just poking at it once and wandering off.
Right, not opening it, asking it to write a poem about a cat, and never coming back.
Which, for the record, is not a business plan.
No, it is not. And third, maybe my favorite one, the average age of a founder behind a genuinely successful high-growth startup is 45, not 22, not some hoodie-wearing college dropout in a garage.
That one I believe without much effort.
I figured you would. This whole week we've been talking about tech anxiety and imposter syndrome, the stuff that stops people before they ever really begin. And today I want to pull that apart a little. Not in a heavy way, just enough to show that a lot of the fear people feel is based on stories that sound true, but aren't.
And that matters. Because if you're making decisions off a bad assumption, you're not stuck because you're incapable. You're stuck because you've been sold the wrong picture.
Yes, that's exactly it. People hear, "I'm too old, I'm too late, I'm not technical," and after a while, it starts to sound like common sense.
When sometimes it's just common repetition.
Ooh, that's good.
Well, don't make too much of it.
Too late. It's in the episode now. So here's where we're headed. We're going to talk about why self-doubt is often misread, why fear around technology gets blamed on age when it may have more to do with confidence and motivation, and what the numbers actually say about who builds successful businesses and when.
All right, that's useful. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with imposter syndrome. Or technically, what it was originally called, the imposter phenomenon. In 1978, 2 psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, published a paper after noticing a pattern in high-achieving clients. These were successful, capable people who still privately believed they were frauds.
Meaning they could do the work, had done the work, maybe had the results to prove it, and still thought they were getting away with something.
Exactly. They thought their success was luck or timing or somehow an accident. Like any minute now, somebody was going to step forward, point a finger, and say, "Ah, yes, we've reviewed the file and you do not belong here."
That's a miserable way to live.
It really is. And the surprising part is how common it is. Once other researchers started studying it more broadly, they found about 70% of people experience it at some point.
70%. So most people at some stage feel underqualified even when they aren't.
Yep, and it's not just ordinary people quietly wrestling with it. Some very famous, very accomplished people described the same thing. Albert Einstein, late in life, talked about feeling like an involuntary swindler. Maya Angelou said after writing 11 books that every time a new one came out, she thought, "This is the one where they'll find me out."
Einstein feeling like a fraud ought to calm down a few people.
It should, but the part I really want listeners to hear is this. Feeling like an imposter may not mean you're unqualified. It may mean you're taking the work seriously. The more you know, the more aware you are of what you don't know.
That rings true. I've known plenty of people who knew very little and had absolutely no doubts at all.
Same. Loud confidence is not the same thing as competence.
Not even close.
So when someone says, I feel like a fraud learning this AI stuff, or I feel behind, one possible translation is, I understand enough to realize this matters, and I care enough to want to do it well.
That's a very different reading.
It really is. And it connects directly to tech fear. Because people often say, well, younger people are just naturally better with technology. They're digital natives. It's in the air they breathe. And I get why that story is appealing, but the research we covered points another direction.
Motivation.
Motivation. Studies have found adults learn new technology at nearly identical rates to younger people when the motivation is there. So the issue isn't age as much as confidence and expectation.
That's a big distinction. Younger people may walk in assuming they'll figure it out. Older adults may walk in assuming they'll struggle.
Yes, and that expectation matters. There's a research term for it, stereotype threat. The fear of confirming a negative stereotype about your group can actually hurt your performance.
So if somebody sits down at the computer already thinking, I'm too old for this, they have handicapped themselves before they start.
That's the idea. The fear creates part of the problem it's worried about. Not because the person lacks ability, but because their head is full of static.
I've seen that in business for years. A person can talk themselves out of a room they were fully qualified to walk into.
And that's why I think this matters so much. If you've been reading your discomfort as proof that you can't do it, you may be misreading the signal entirely.
Could be the opposite. Could be proof you're taking it seriously enough to learn it right.
Now let's get to the numbers on age and actual advantage, because this is where things get really encouraging. Researchers ran a huge study, over 100,000 people, looking at when different cognitive abilities peak. And for vocabulary and verbal reasoning, two things that matter a lot in business, the peak age was 67.
67. That's not a footnote. That's a headline.
I know, because we hear so much about decline that people assume every useful mental skill peaks early and then just rolls downhill. But the kind of intelligence built from accumulated experience, crystallized intelligence, keeps growing much later in life.
And in business, that's not trivial. Pattern recognition, judgment, reading people, knowing when something smells wrong. Those are not kid skills.
No, they are not. And that's why the founder data is so good. MIT and the Census Bureau studied more than 2.7 million startup founders and asked a practical question. At what age do people actually build the most successful companies?
Not the most hyped, the most successful.
Right. Top growth, high revenue, genuinely successful companies. The average age was 45.
Which, again, sounds a lot more believable to me than the cultural fairy tale that all success comes from somebody barely old enough to rent a car.
And it gets stronger. Founders over 40 were about twice as likely to build a company in the top 1% of performers as founders under 25.
Twice as likely. That's not a motivational poster. That's a serious gap.
It is. And the reasons are pretty plain when you think about them. Older founders tend to have industry knowledge, stronger professional networks, more patience, and better judgment. They've seen things go wrong before, which sounds depressing, but it's actually useful.
Useful? It's gold. If you've already made mistakes, paid for them, and learned from them, you're not starting from zero. You're starting with scar tissue and pattern recognition.
That is the most Tom Morgan way to say experience has value.
It's true, though.
It is. And that leads right into AI. Because people still assume AI is mostly being driven by teenagers, college students, people who grew up online. But when researchers started looking at who was consistently using tools like ChatGPT, not just trying them once, but really integrating them, adults over 55 were among the fastest growing groups.
And that makes sense to me. Older adults usually aren't there to be entertained. They're there because they want something solved.
Exactly. Younger people may have more casual comfort. Older adults often have more purpose. They come with a real problem. Write this email. Help me organize this idea. Speed up this task. Make this business easier to run.
A tool used with purpose gets learned faster than a toy used out of curiosity.
Yes. So if we put all of this together, the picture changes pretty dramatically. Feeling self-doubt doesn't mean you're broken. Being older doesn't mean you can't learn tech. And having decades of experience doesn't put you behind. It may put you in a better position than you realized.
Here's my takeaway. A lot of people listening have been told, directly or indirectly, that they're too late, too old, too non-technical, too whatever. But the research we're talking about says the opposite. You may have the exact ingredients that make this work: judgment, language, patience, experience, and a reason to use the tools.
So here's your small challenge this week. Share one of these facts with somebody who needs it. Maybe that's a friend. Maybe it's your brother-in-law. Maybe, honestly, maybe it's yourself on a sticky note by the computer.
Whatever works.
And if you're ready to keep going, everything's waiting for you at school.com/thewisdomadvantage. Course, tools, community, all of it. We'll be back next time. I'm Anna Morgan.
And I'm Tom Morgan. Anna, good job.
Thanks, Dad. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.